I'll start with Donald from New Zealand Ministry of Education. How's the landscape changed for MOE in the use of data?
From a Ministry of Education perspective, basically we've gone from this open, free-for-all and distributed data with extremely poor data quality in an uncontrolled fashion, and we can talk, it's almost like the Wild West, to this secure, trustworthy, well-integrated data in a controlled environment. As I don't know in Australia if you've heard, some small government organisations in New Zealand had privacy breaches in the past year. So data privacy has become a key to us in New Zealand. So to us, we see it as an essential aspect of our organisation. As for cloud, even though our GCDO, now that's our government chief data officer, has indicated that we can put data into the cloud, in government organisations, we've been slightly reserved about putting our private data into the cloud. Even though that it's been approved to put it into the Australian environment, we as New Zealand haven't adopted our West Island as a part of New Zealand. So as far as custodianship and data sovereignty, we see it as a risk in cloud offerings.
Cool, thank you. And Benson, from a Queensland Health perspective, health and our personal data is obviously getting very important to us all. Are you seeing similar things in Queensland Health, in cloud adoption, or just general access to data?
Yes. So firstly about, maybe I'll touch on general access to the data, and then that gives us a bit of context about the cloud conversation. Privacy, confidentiality, and security is sacred. There's very strict guidelines about what we can and can't do. But we need to be really clear about the importance of separating policy decisions from technology decisions. So the policy is very strict. All of our patients' data or our people's data need to stay on shore. There are very strict processes and governance and policies on how we work with that data. Now, second to that is around data, there is an explosion of demand for it. And I'm not going to use the big data word, but there is a big need for faster, more real-time data, especially for clinical decision-making. And so yeah, it's really put our technology capabilities under pressure. And so in that regard, hold on a second. In that regard, there's been a lot of pressure for us to find solutions that allow us to scale. And given that, the cloud is a natural next step for us. We've happened to be working on cloud capability for a few years, just establishing the foundations of just creating a safe space for us to work in the cloud. It's very much been oriented around infrastructure as a service, which is somewhat short-sighted, but we're making progress. And I guess what we've done is created the beginnings of architectural patterns, leveraging patterns from good practices in other jurisdictions for how we put patient data into the cloud safely, and then hence get the ability to analyze it at scale. And so there is, this year, I think in the last 12 months, there's been a massive explosion of cloud interest, I think led largely from the top by some executives or our chief clinical information officer, who's very well versed in what it means to get into the cloud, having come from the NHS. And so I guess with the mandate, it's given us the empowerment to be able to start exploring what it means to work in the cloud. And so, yeah, we are in production and we're working with our health data in the cloud right now. And but there's challenges with that, but we're also seeing the benefits of it now. So it's pretty early days.
Cool, thank you. And Adam, are you the same? Any different things happening in NPS medicine-wise?
I would say, based on the experience of Benson and Donald as well, we're a bit further ahead with respect to cloud. So first of all, let me point out, MPS is a not-for-profit organisation. We work in the medical space, particularly in primary healthcare, for the effective use of medications. And our programs are to actually improve both patient outcomes and health economic outcomes for mainly the federal government. So we have about 10% of Australian primary healthcare data in our data warehouse, which is a Data Vault data warehouse. And those data are used for the programs for the Department of Health. Those data are also anonymised. So whilst we're very aware of privacy concerns, we're almost certain that if there was unauthorised access to data, that an individual patient could not be identified. That said, so getting back to cloud, we have moved to platform as a service data warehouse. We went live last October. We migrated from on-premise, which was significantly constraining us, and we are yielding tremendous benefits from that. We've become, first of all, we've managed to shed a lot of the issues that come with running your own infrastructure and running databases that, let's say, are not as good as data warehousing as the one we've gone to, and the technical support necessary has significantly reduced, so therefore we can invest more time in delivering business benefits as well. So we have a lot of demand, and currently right now it looks like that we might take on a program that is about the latest hot topic, which is why I'm sitting there, why I'm sitting here and not there as well. So there is demand for what we do, and cloud has been an enabler for us.
Thank you. Yes. Keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thanks.
And Dan, would that reflect what you're seeing from anything that you can talk about of government work that you're doing in the US?
Yeah, absolutely. What I'm seeing is exactly what he stated, in that the government is interested in moving to cloud because of the lower cost of ownership and management and all the other benefits that come with it. Obviously, sensitive data is a bit of another hurdle to overcome, and then there's different levels of sensitive data. So what the government's approach has been, at least in the intel agencies, is to classify different levels of sensitivity. And some of the sensitive data at the lowest level of classification or the lowest level of sensitivity can be moved to the cloud faster and sooner with the proper walls set up. So they're starting with that, and they're slowly moving more sensitive data into the cloud. It also means the vendors in the cloud have to have what's called a federal on-ramp or a federal division, so that it's dedicated and it's on federal government approved servers and other things that, you know, data centers aren't available to the general public, kind of thing. So that's sort of what they're doing.
Cool, thank you. And taking that a bit further in, you were mentioning governance, data privacy. I'll actually stay on you if I could. In that sense, what are you seeing in the play of data privacy and governance versus just getting operational efficiencies with an organization?
Absolutely, and part of that is learning and understanding where and when encryption can be applied. Certain types of encryption, if you have super sensitive or highly classified data and you want to put it in the cloud, you don't put the data itself in the cloud, you try to determine what analytics you drive from that. And then there are different ways of desensitizing that information, ranging from aggregation or higher levels of grain or lower levels of grain, depending on which angle you come at, versus just supplying the counts, all the way down to, well, we need one-way encryption of individual records. So some records make it and other records make it in terms of aggregates, but not in terms of the records themselves.
Cool. And Donald, so from MOE perspective, is governance becoming a bigger thing for New Zealand government and MOE definitively?
The easy answer is yes. However, we need to make sure that governance does not deter us from improving our speed of delivery. As for privacy, just on that, we deal with private and sensitive data in the Ministry of Education, where a lot of information around children is kept at the ministry, and we deem that as extremely sensitive. Dan, can I ask you a question? You said that private and confidential data that's not question and answer session, will not be put into the cloud. Will this be a hybrid approach that you're going to offer?
It's a governed approach. What they're doing is they're slowing down the progression to the cloud for the highly sensitive data so that they can govern every step and make sure that every part of it has been cleared and proven. So they will take, for instance, generated test data that looks like the highly sensitive data and run it through the entire process, and then they will vet it on what ends up on the cloud. This is all QA, QC type of stuff. They're determined by the outcomes of what they find in vetting the process. They will either discover breaks in the process, the method, or the platform. Risks and vulnerabilities then have to be mitigated before the actual sensitive data from, quote, production makes it into the cloud. They still are moving in that direction. They just slow it down a little bit so they have more control and more visibility.
Okay, thank you. Back to the governance, we see governance as key to our organization, both in a technical sense and a business sense. For a technical sense, is because a data vault is pattern-based, we need to ensure that patterns are adhered to. In the past, we did not follow the pattern-based implementation of a data vault, and it caused chaos in our organization. So working with Certis, we've implemented these strict guidelines and controls over technical implementation. So yes, I see governance in the technical side as key to success of a data vault. As for the business governance, that is also key because that drives what goes into the data vault as well. We found that our technical staff were making the decisions. We implemented the business governance over that so that we prioritized what actually went into the data vault.
Cool, thank you. And Benson, same sort of question in full-on governance versus getting good data to end users.
Sure. Yeah, as we touched on, the different. Governance is an umbrella term for so many different things. It touches on almost everything. And as you said before, there's governance relating to business understanding, which is really about engaging the business and ensuring that their role in governance in terms of defining glossaries, business rules, governing the business rules, versions of business rules, owning the models. That's a really key part of this. There's no point giving them data unless there's some context to go with it, and becomes meaningless or harmful to them to use. And so that's a big challenge right now, is trying to educate the business that they actually have a role in information governance. It's not somebody else's job. And also they have a role in, given that we're moving to this world of self-service analytics, that it's not privacy or security people who do the job of security and privacy. Everyone actually has a role. Anyone who gets their hands on data has an accountability, needs to be trained. Understand that information security and information and privacy should be part of people's role descriptions when we bring people on. And then going towards the back end more about the engineering and the warehouse. Just as you said before, governance around how we do work, how we standardize the way we do work, how we let parallel teams run and leverage standards. I guess that's where Data Vault really shines and why it's so appealing. It's because it's these patterns have set a basis for us to be able to work in parallel and allow these different projects to maintain their own sovereignty, which used to be a real sticking point. And then governance overall about the strategy. Like, where are we taking this data vault, or where are we taking this data platform and capability, and talking about future of services, and how do we actually build in the discipline around building service level agreements around data flows? That's a new language, and once again, there's no one else talking about that other than customers and the people who are accountable for governing to ensure that those services are safe, but they're also like fit for purpose. So it's a big job ahead of us, and to be honest, we really focused our governance conversation quite narrowly, where we should really think more broadly about what's everyone's role in governance rather than just information management specialists. It's more a comment than an opinion, but I'm starting to see it play out right now. Not enough governance people.
Yeah, sure. Adam, I'll move on to another question. You were saying you're feeling quite mature in your Data Vault capability. What was it that actually drove you to consider Data Vault and actually make the decision? Your microphone's off, Adam.
Muted myself, forgot to unmute. Right. Good question. It was quite some time ago, and it was before I joined this organisation. I worked for one of Australia's two large insurers. There's two main insurers in Australia. And I had seen Data Vault presented at a conference, and it really aroused my interest. And that's because of fundamentally the other two methods being third normal form and dimensional warehouses. I had suffered the pain of them both with respect to them being brittle, slow, rigid, performance issues as well, particularly if you've built a warehouse around dimensional models. You're meant to have conformed dimensions, but you end up with a lot of variations of conformed dimensions because suddenly a business case comes along that or a use case comes along that results in the conformed dimension not supporting your needs, so you create another instance of it. So I worked in one place, I worked in one of those warehouses that had about 10 date dimensions. Now, why would you have variance in your date dimensions? And what we were just talking about is a lack of governance. For one, it's easy to create a copy and work on it in a different project than alter it and deal with the regression testing. So anyway, a lot of those problems. So I was very interested in Data Vault. I'd seen it, I thought this was a good way to go. So we had a major program of work where a new claim system was coming upstream from us. And in order for us to deliver within the timeframes, we could not wait for that system to be stable, so we knew how to model it. So as that system evolved, we built a Data Vault layer to ingest that system and model that system in line, slightly behind the project trajectory of the upstream project. So by the time that finished, we had a model that reflected actually what was going on. And again, because requirements were changing upstream from us, we then had a solution that could adapt. So effectively, whilst we weren't remediating the entire landscape at that stage, that Data Vault model became a sort of refined staging area, if you like, to then feed the downstream systems. And that worked well for us. So we considered that a pilot project, and then later on, when everything had settled down, we then moved to adopt Data Vault strategically and then start to mop up a lot of the legacy systems into that solution to put us on a more sustainable footing.
Cool, thank you. And Benson, same sort of question. What drove you to pick up Data Vault in Queensland Health?
How long have you got?
You have 9 minutes altogether if you steal
really
everybody
simple.
else's.
It's been a long journey. It's really important to understand the dynamics of our organisation to understand why Data Vault makes sense. We have 16 CIOs, all of which essentially act as warlords of their own data capabilities. They all have their own stacks. At any point in time, we have more than two handfuls of data-related projects that are messing around with our enterprise. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just the nature, the dynamic across the state with so many different chiefs and so many different lines of business. So that's the dynamic. And then 2 years ago, I guess, I was tasked with writing a strategy for BI, for Queensland Health, which was the impossible task. Spent about a year just talking to lots of people and understanding that, you know, sites want local sovereignty. They will never trust the Department of Health, which is the ivory tower, to go and build them the perfect enterprise data warehouse. There's a lot of data warehouse and strategy skepticism. But there needs to be a way forward that kind of bridges, you know, a strategic approach with allowing sites and projects to continue to do their own thing without being impeded. So, you know, it was pretty apparent that there was a need for some sort of centralized, governed, but somewhat federated capability. And the think big, start small philosophy was really what, I guess, allowed Data Vault to really shine here, because once again, it's an iterative approach. It's based on standards and interoperability rather than a monolithic project. It allows sites or projects to build their own areas of within their subject matter, but allow it to be in the context of a greater whole. And it facilitated potentially the foundation upon which we could launch other marts. So at any point in time, I think we have like 30 plus warehouses, Queensland Health. They're all black boxes. There's no standardization. There's no way to integrate them. Yet there's so much talk at the exec level and, you know, health analytics conferences of single patient view and, you know, the from birth to, you know, to death. We can't do it. And then on another side note, there's an actual practice called data linkage where, and linkage is a very key part of health, being able to draw insight across the not just the data sources that I have, but also genomics, behavioral things, pathology. Right now, all this COVID stuff's really brought that to a head. So our workload's just exploded. So we're playing catch up there, but that's another topic. So yeah, it's essentially the ability to link, progressively link and explore links without overly binding things upstream. So I guess in summary, what that's allowed us to do is, I always talk about information being an asset. No one actually goes into thinking about what that truly means. Assets imply ability to get value ongoing, not just a fire and forget project that gets a piece of insight and gets thrown away, which is the current dynamic of the way projects are run. So now we have a basis upon which projects can continue to maintain their scope, but once they're done, they become rolled into a bigger picture, which ultimately, through an organic means and not some centrally commanded means, we will, I reckon, get to that linked patient view.
Cool, thank you. Lots in there. I'm sure you could go on for a good amount of time. Donald, same question to you in terms of why Data Vault? Oh, you're on mute as well.
Very similar to what Benson has just highlighted, is we have a multitude of data marts spread across the organization. And the inability to integrate these into a single set of data was a major issue for us. We were finding that the focus was more, what can we say, more business focused than a national focus. So we started looking at how we could actually integrate this data. Also, what's driven us is the rate of change. In some aspects, when policy changes, we have to change according to that policy. And to do that in a standard data mart is extremely difficult. You have to rebuild. So with using a Data Vault, it's easy and adaptable as well. The ability to both integrate and separate as well is because there's some information that we cannot integrate due to the privacy clauses of intended use. So in some cases, we need to separate that data from other data, and that can be done in the Data Vault as well. So we were very lucky in that aspect that we could implement it in the Data Vault. Another thing is information security is key. We're working to ensure that the privacy is adhered to. And also, we've identified 10 key business concepts that we can put into the Data Vault to integrate as well. Yes, we're still early on our Data Vault implementation, but we are getting there.
Cool, thank you. And I'll give a slightly different version of that same question to Dan. Over and above the statements the guys have made, when you actually set out to build out Data Vault, were there any other things in the government side that you would say are critical in terms of getting the organization moving on saying, yes, something like Data Vault is what we need?
Absolutely. To get government organizations to say yes, there are some critical factors. First is training, but it doesn't happen like it does in a commercial project. You don't walk in and train 400 people in 3 months, which you could do in a commercial project. You walk in and you train one team at a time. Each team in the classified space has slightly different needs and most of the time different clearance levels. So each team, and what we do is we tailor the training for specific clearances. If you ask me about security and Data Vault, I'm going to ask you how far down the rabbit hole do you want to go, because each team will have specific needs. Some teams will have to go all the way to the hot swap disk level. Other teams will only stop at the network levels. Other teams will stop at the architecture levels. And other teams will be on the BI levels, wanting to know how to leverage the data that you've put together from another team. The teams do talk, so we do work with the management on collaboration. Some teams are allowed to talk, other teams are not. So collaboration across teams where they're not allowed to talk is a bit tricky. You learn to talk in parables, and you learn to talk in what we call, anecdotal evidence, so to speak. You tell stories. But to summarize all of that, there's a lot of training that goes on around the security, and there's a high level of governance. Everybody who touches a work desk or a desktop or has a login can see certain data and not others. The data itself has to be cordoned off by a specialized team. So certain data sets you thought might be available aren't, and they're cordoned off, and you have to actually go teach the other team to access that data set before the BI outcomes can be put together on the other end.
Sounds interesting.
It does get interesting fast, yes.
Yeah. And as a final question for any of the people out here who are thinking about dipping their toes or jumping in headfirst into Data Vault, what advice would you give to somebody starting out on their Data Vault journey, and the first one to put their hand up gets to answer first? Come on, Donald. Okay,
I'll do it. We've learned a hard lesson in the Ministry of Education. To start off with, make sure you've got standards in place. Standards. I think that's the first thing taught in your Data Vault 2 course is standards. The next is your technology. Make sure that you've got suitable technology that creates automation and makes your life a lot easier. Skills. Now, Dan's touched on this. Both in your software that you implement, make sure that your people are skilled in it. And then also the Data Vault implementation and methodology, make sure they are trained in it. And another key aspect of us is we found people had been trained in the methodology, but the full implementation of a Data Vault was not it as part of their forte. So we really battled in the beginning, and we created havoc in our organization. We approached Certus to assist us and provide SMEs a subject matter expert, and by doing that is actually helped us and assisted us in implementing a Data Vault correctly. Both technical and business governments, make sure that your governance is in place. Without it, it causes chaos. And then, of course, make sure you've got resourcing. We had we're in a phase at the moment that we limited with our resourcing, so we're really battling creating that momentum going forward. And that's my advice.
Cool.
Sure.
Thank you.
That's good. I'd extend that. Just to dive into some of those things. So I've become aware of, and there was one significant one in Melbourne, which I will say I was not involved in, where the legacy system structures were simply taken forward and decomposed into Data Vault versus doing the analysis around business concepts. So make sure you do that analysis. Your business concepts in Data Vault are your hubs. If you get your hubs wrong, it's the backbone of the whole thing. So simply don't take a legacy data warehouse or an upstream source system and just try and decompose the data structures into Data Vault, thinking that because you've got this data item, it becomes a hub because it's the business key of a table upstream, for example. So make sure you do your analysis and get those business concepts right and aligned to the language of the business. So those hubs represent what the business talk about and the things that they want to track and measure. And also the only other thing, as Donald spoke about, chaos without standards as well. So if you've got the luxury, incrementally implement and learn. Make sure you do that retrospective, if you like, through your iterations, and make sure you build that team's confidence as you go.
Mm-hmm. Cool, thank you. And Benson?
Yep. Yeah, you've said the important stuff, but the only thing I can add is to completely re-emphasize the importance of the information model before trying to rush into building a data vault. And that's a really important opportunity to engage the business, because there's no point building a data vault unless you have a sense of how it will be used. I mean, that's a personal belief. And it's also an opportunity to have the business understand how their concept of their workflow and their business language translates into the warehouse. And our business people, our clinical people, are involved in helping us draw hubs and links, because it's the next step from when we're talking to them about their business processes and their workflows. So in that regard, it's an opportunity to build a dynamic where you have an end-to-end team, which is, I guess, somewhat agile in practice. And ultimately, they own their own glossaries. So we have some Data Vault curious and Data Vault not trained, but they understand the concepts of Data Vault enough. And hence, we don't have a need to demonstrate for the proved value of the Vault. They understand that inherently by being part of this design process. The other thing I would advise is, if you have the ability, build a community of practice around good information and good data practice, not just Data Vault. Data Vault is a really important, powerful tool, but it's also an opportunity to also just demonstrate and show broader data practitioners who may or may not understand or be supportive of Data Vault, just to see the work as it progresses. And that community of practice will eventually grow. And so we've grown from 1 or 2 Data Vault practitioners, and it's now like 20 or something. So people trained by Certus, and more people interested, and actually more BI people who tend to be interested in the visualization and asking to be trained in Data Vault as well.
Great, great. Well, the clock up there says we're at time. It says here I may have 7 minutes. Have we got time for a couple of questions? Yeah. Any questions from the floor?
I'd like to understand, how did you approach the cycle of getting funding, approval, probably putting forward a business case? Because Data Vault seems to be unknown when it comes to executors. How did you approach that challenge?
Anybody want to?
I can. The experience in the insurance company where we moved to strategically, it was off the back of a pilot. So that pilot, let's say, was necessary to deliver a broader program. So the funding for that pilot itself was snuck into the broader program, and it was just based on functional language. It didn't talk about the methodology. It just spoke about the need and how we're going to deliver that need. But then when it came to the question of, okay, now we've got a big piece of work to do, and the discussions around what method we should use for that, and therefore what resources you were going to need to deliver that method, the pilot itself had proven that it was capable of working. So that's one way of doing it, but generally, if you have the need to establish a new data warehouse, then that's got to be a business-driven need. And I'm not sure the executive will be too interested in how you're going to do that. They'll be more interested in what they're going to get and also what risks involved and how you're going to de-risk. And I would say, based on a mature and governed approach that's been discussed here, you've got a pattern-based method which you can introduce automation that has been proven elsewhere, so that should provide confidence that it can proceed.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you. So thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.